At least 3 people have been killed in a Ukrainian drone attack in the Moscow region, and 12 more were injured in other drone strikes.
500 drones, one night, one target, Moscow. A huge wave of more than 500 Ukrainian drones attacked Russia overnight in one of the largest Ukrainian barrages of the entire conflict. Russian air defenses worked through the night across 14 regions simultaneously. Air defenses shot down 556 drones, far above the usually reported few dozen, and still could not stop what Ukraine sent toward the Russian capital. Debris fell on Russia's largest airport, Sheremetyevo, without causing damage or affecting flights, but the debris was there, on the grounds of the airport that serves Moscow, the city that Putin has spent 3 years telling the Russian people is safe. An oil and gas refinery near Moscow was struck, 3 residential buildings damaged, 3 people killed in the Moscow region alone. Zelensky confirmed the strikes were entirely justified. Ukrainian drones flew more than 500 kilometers from Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine was, in his words, overcoming Russian air defense systems concentrated in and around the capital. Overcoming, not avoiding, not circumventing, overcoming. Russia spent billions building the most concentrated air defense network on Earth around Moscow. 500 drones penetrated it in a single night, and what Ukraine hit in that strike is something Russia cannot replace. To understand why this attack is different from every previous strike on Moscow, you need to understand what Ukraine has been building toward for 3 years. In the early months of this war, Ukrainian drones reaching Moscow seemed impossible. The Russian capital sits 400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Russian air defense systems created a layered protective bubble around the city that military analysts considered essentially impenetrable for the drone technology Ukraine possessed in 2022. Ukraine did not accept that assessment. Ukraine spent 3 years systematically developing the capability to reach Moscow, not occasionally, not symbolically, but at scale. 500 drones in a single night is not a symbolic gesture. It is an operational statement. It is Ukraine demonstrating that it has built a drone production and launch capability so large that Russia's air defenses cannot absorb the volume even when fully concentrated around the capital. The interceptions, far above the usually reported few dozen, took place across 14 Russian regions as well as the annexed Crimean Peninsula and the Black and Azov Seas simultaneously. Russia was defending 14 regions and Crimea at the same time. Every interceptor missile fired over Belgorod was a missile not available over Moscow. Every air defense system repositioned to protect an oil refinery in the Urals was a system not covering the capital. Ukraine forced Russia to defend everywhere simultaneously and then sent 500 drones at Moscow anyway. And here is the part that makes this strategically decisive. The oil refinery struck near Moscow is not just a symbolic target. Moscow's refinery complex is part of the fuel distribution infrastructure that supplies the Russian capital and surrounding regions. Every strike that degrades refinery capacity reduces the fuel available for Russian military vehicles, logistics convoys, and the air defense systems themselves that are supposed to be protecting the city. Ukraine is not just striking Moscow, Ukraine is striking the infrastructure that allows Moscow to defend itself. The scale of what Ukraine launched reveals something about Ukrainian production capacity that Russia cannot afford to ignore. 500 drones in a single overnight operation. The previous record for a single Ukrainian drone barrage against Russia was measured in the low hundreds. Ukraine just more than doubled that number in a single night. Zelensky said that the drones had flown more than 500 kilometers from Ukrainian territory and that Ukraine was overcoming Russian air defense systems concentrated in and around the capital. 500 kilometers. That is not short-range harassment. That is a strategic strike capability operating at ranges that required years of engineering development to achieve. The drones that reached Moscow on the night of May 17th were not the drones Ukraine was building in 2022. They are the product of 3 years of accelerated development, 20-nation production partnerships, and battlefield learning that no military in history has accumulated as fast as Ukraine has in this conflict. And here is what Russia cannot replace. The air defense interceptor missiles Russia fired that night, Every missile expended defending Moscow, defending the 14 regions simultaneously targeted, defending Sheremetyevo airport, defending the refinery approaches. Every one of those missiles came from stockpiles that are finite and increasingly difficult to replenish under Western sanctions. Russia's air defense missile production cannot keep pace with the rate at which Ukraine is forcing Russia to expend interceptors. 500 drones launched, 556 interceptors fired just to stop the ones Russia could stop. The economics of that exchange run entirely against Russia.
It targeted President Vladimir Putin's war industrial complex, that's for sure.
Ukraine spent a few $100s per drone. Russia spent tens of thousands of dollars per interceptor, and Ukraine is building drones at millions per year across 20 countries. Russia is building interceptors under sanctions that restrict access to the microchip technology and precision components that determine missile performance. Every night, Ukraine launches a mass drone barrage. Russia burns through irreplaceable interceptor stocks at a rate its production cannot sustain. And every night Ukraine launches, the barrage gets larger. The residential damage and civilian casualties matter beyond the humanitarian dimension. A woman was killed after a drone hit her home in Khimki, a Russian city just northwest of Moscow. 2 men died in the village of Pogorelki, 10 kilometers north of the capital. At least 12 people were wounded in Moscow itself, mostly near the entrance to the city's oil refinery. Moscow residents are dying in drone strikes. Russian citizens living in the suburbs of the capital are now experiencing what Ukrainian civilians have experienced for 3 years. The psychological and political dimension of that reality inside Russia cannot be overstated. A Moscow resident, 39 years old, living in the suburb of Putilkovo, where a high-rise was damaged, described it this way: "The hit was so powerful that it almost knocked me out of bed. I opened my window and saw smoke rising." That is a Moscow resident, not a Ukrainian, not a person in a frontline city who understood the risk of living near the conflict. A person in a Moscow suburb who went to sleep believing the Russian capital's air defenses would keep them safe, who woke up to an explosion powerful enough to knock them from their bed. Putin promised the Russian people that the war would stay in Ukraine, that Moscow was safe, that Russian air defenses were impenetrable, that the special military operation was proceeding according to plan. The smoke rising over Putilkovo at dawn on May 17th told a different story. And here is the part no one is talking about. Russia's independent polling agency Levada Center has now recorded 7 consecutive weeks of declining approval ratings for Putin. The week after the Moscow strikes, that number is expected to fall further, because the contract between Putin and the Russian people was always built on one promise above all others: the war will not come home, Moscow is safe, your family is protected.
Попыток запугивания России. Запугивание граждан России.
500 drones over Moscow in a single night breaks that contract in a way that no amount of state television propaganda can fully repair. The Russian citizens who felt the explosion, who saw the smoke, who watched debris fall on Sheremetyevo, they know what happened. And they know that Putin told them it could not happen. The political consequences of that broken promise compound with every additional strike. Every barrage that reaches Moscow makes the next denial harder to sustain. Every residential building damaged makes the war more personal for Russian families who believed they were insulated from its consequences. Ukraine is not just hitting infrastructure. Ukraine is dismantling the psychological distance between the Russian public and the war their government launched. Here is what Ukraine hitting Moscow with 500 drones means for America. And it is the dimension most coverage consistently underestimates. The drone capability that reached Moscow on May 17th was built with American support, American intelligence, American technology partnerships. The production networks spanning 20 nations that are now manufacturing Ukrainian drones on protected NATO soil were assembled with American diplomatic leadership, creating the framework that made those partnerships possible. What often gets overlooked is this: America did not just give Ukraine weapons, America helped Ukraine build a military so innovative and so capable that it can now launch 500 drones at the capital of a nuclear-armed adversary and have Zelensky describe the result as overcoming Russian air defenses. Every American taxpayer who has supported Ukraine's defense should understand what their investment produced on the night of May 17th. 500 drones over Moscow, Russia's largest airport hit by debris, an oil refinery struck near the capital, 14 regions defending simultaneously, 556 interceptor missiles expended in a single night that Russia cannot easily replace. Our men and women who provided the framework, the intelligence, and the technology connections that enabled Ukraine's drone program are part of every drone that reached Moscow that night. They are part of the strategic message that Ukraine delivered to Putin and to the Russian people who woke up to smoke rising over their suburbs. This is what American commitment to Allied defense produces when sustained across 4 years of the most consequential conflict in Europe since the Second World War. Not just weapons, not just funding. A Ukrainian military capable of launching the largest drone barrage in the history of this conflict and overcoming the air defenses of a nuclear-armed nation's capital city in a single night. 500 drones, 14 regions defended simultaneously, 3 killed in the Moscow region, Sheremetyevo airport hit by debris, an oil refinery struck near the capital. 556 interceptors expended in a single night, 7 consecutive weeks of declining Putin approval ratings. A Moscow suburb resident knocked from his bed by an explosion he was promised could never happen. Putin told the Russian people Moscow was safe. Putin told them the air defenses protecting the capital were impenetrable. Putin told them the war would stay in Ukraine. On the night of May 17th, 500 Ukrainian drones told Russia something different, in a language that required no translation, in a message that landed in Moscow suburbs with enough force to knock a 39-year-old man out of his bed. The war did not stay in Ukraine. The war came to Moscow.
Long-range attack drones as it strikes deep into the Moscow region and sent a chilling message to Kremlin.
And the next barrage will be larger than the last. Is Ukraine's ability to strike Moscow with 500 drones in a single night the moment Russia finally understands it cannot win this war on the terms Putin started it? Or does Russia still have a response that changes what happened on May 17th? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment. If you want daily coverage that does not sugarcoat what is actually happening, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I post every single day, and I am not stopping. Russia's response to the barrage reveals the depth of its strategic problem. Russian state media initially denied the scale of the attack, then acknowledged it, then claimed victory because the refinery technology was not damaged, then had to acknowledge that 3 people died in the Moscow region and 12 were wounded in the city itself. The narrative shifted 4 times in 12 hours because no single narrative could make 500 Ukrainian drones over Moscow sound like anything other than what it was. The Kremlin's information management problem is compounding with every strike that reaches Russian territory. State television can control what Russians hear about the front lines in Ukraine. It cannot control what Russians in Khimki and Putilkovo saw with their own eyes and felt with their own bodies. The gap between the official narrative and the lived experience of Russian citizens near Moscow is now wide enough that no propaganda framework can fully bridge it. Putin built his political survival on the promise that Russians who stayed out of politics, who accepted the war as necessary, who trusted the state to handle the difficult decisions, would be protected from the consequences. 500 drones over Moscow in a single night is the most visible evidence yet that this promise cannot be kept. The war that was supposed to stay in Ukraine is knocking people out of their beds in Moscow suburbs at 4 in the morning. The Sheremetyevo dimension deserves specific attention. Russia's largest airport serves as the primary gateway between Moscow and the world. Every international flight connecting Russia to the few remaining countries willing to maintain air links passes through Sheremetyevo. Drone debris falling on airport grounds without causing damage is not a military victory for Ukraine. It is a warning. It is Ukraine demonstrating the precision and range to place ordnance within the perimeter of Russia's most internationally visible civilian infrastructure. The next strike does not need to be less precise. It can be more precise. That message was received in Moscow, in the Kremlin, and in every capital watching what Ukraine demonstrated on the night of May 17th.